A real little water sprite. When the water sprite came home one day, the water sprite woman said to him, "Today you have to be very quiet. We've got a little boy." "You don't say." The water sprite cried happily. "A real little boy?" "Yes, a real little water sprite," said the woman. "But please, take off your boots and be quiet when you go inside. I think he's still asleep." The water sprite took off his yellow boots and tiptoed into the house. The house was built of reeds and stood deep down on the bottom of the mill pond. It was plastered with mud instead of mortar, for it was in Water Sprite house. But otherwise it was just like other houses, only much smaller. It had a kitchen and a pantry, a living room, a bedroom and a hallway. The floors were cleanly sprinkled with white sand. Cheerful green curtains woven from algae and creepers hung in front of the windows. And of course there were all the rooms, the hallway and the kitchen and those two pantry full of water. How could it be otherwise when the house stood at the bottom of the mill pond? So, the water sprite tiptoed across the hallway to the kitchen. From the kitchen he crept into the living room. From the living room he crept into the bedroom. Then, when he went quietly to the bed, he saw the little water sprite boy lying in a rush basket. The boy had his eyes closed and was sleeping. His little fists lay on the pillow on either side of the fat, red face. It looked as if the little water sprite was covering his ears. "How do you like him?" asked the water sprite woman. She had also come in and was looking over the water sprite shoulder. "The boy is a bit small," said the water sprite, "but otherwise I actually like him." He bent over the rush basket and counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. "What are you counting?" asked the water sprite woman. "Oh, I'm just counting if he has all his fingers," said the water sprite softly. "And just look at those tight little legs. When he grows up he shall have a nice pair of yellow boots and a reed green jacket and brown trousers and a bright red stocking cap. I like his hair best. You know I always wanted a little boy like that with green hair. You, be careful," the water sprite woman admonished. "What are you doing now?" "Just let me," said the water sprite. "I'll have to see if he has webbed fingers too. That's important for a water sprite boy." And the water sprite wanted to open one fist of the boy. But then the little water sprite woke up and rubbed his eyes. "You, look," the water sprite father suddenly called out very loudly. "Do you see that? Do you see it too? So he probably has webbed fingers," laughed the mother. That too," cried the merman happily. "But now I even know what eyes he has. They're green, they're real merman eyes." And the water sprite father lifted his little water sprite out of the rush basket and held it high over his head. And then he danced around in the room with him so that the reed walls shook and the white floor just twirled. He kept singing, "We have a little water sprite. We have a little water sprite." Then the fish came swimming from all sides and looked in at the windows with their goggle eyes. The little water sprite happily kicked his arms and legs. And anyone who wanted to see it saw at first glance that he really was a real little water sprite. "Gosh, that's a boy. What do you think?" said the water sprite to his wife in the evening. "It's proper that we have a party in honor of the little boy, isn't it? I'll invite all the relatives to it tomorrow so we can show everyone. And you will cook and roast, so that we also have something to snack on. It's not like poor people here." Well, the water sprite went the next day to invite his relatives, and those who lived further away. He sent fish as messengers. The water sprite woman stayed at home and cooked and fried. Until late in the evening she stirred the pots, swung the frying pan and clattered the bowls. In between, she gave the little water sprite his pap. The water sprite had invited 27 relatives, and 26 of them came. There were 12 watermen with their wives, a wellman and the bridge woman from the St. Nepomuk's Bridge. The wellman lived in the rubberrunning behind the fire station. He was very old and wore a white beard. The other watermen and their wives came from the village pond, from the frog pool, from the duck puddle, from the red and black crafts, from the trout water, from the stone stream and from 5 other streams. "Greetings," said the little water sprite's father. "It's right that you all turned up so punctually. My wife and I say thank you very much and we also hope that you will enjoy it. Won't you show us your little boy first?" The merman from this time back asked the little merman's father. "No," replied the water sprite father. "First of all, let's dine. The main thing is left for last." The 12 watermen with their wives, the fountain man and the bridge woman all had to sit down at the long table that the mill pond waterman had set up for them in front of his house, because the living room would have been much too small for this large company. The fountain man with the white beard got the place of honour in the middle. Little water sprite mother brought the guests first a soup of duckweed, then a dish of fried fish eggs with roasted seaweed. Then she served a salad made from pickled watercress and chopped marigold stalks. And for those who were still not full, there was a whole bowl of steamed frog spawn with salted water fleas at the end. Yes, it just wasn't like poor people. Tell me, the water sprite from the rotor flossel asked the water sprite from the mill pond over dessert. Didn't you invite your brother-in-law, Merman? He would have been part of it, wouldn't he? Well, what do you think? Said the water sprite father. I won't forget my brother-in-law, Merman. I sent him my fastest trout as a messenger. Does the pike know why he doesn't come? He must have been a little late on the long journey, said the fountain man. As I know him, he'll definitely come. He can't do that to you at all, water sprite. If you're really fed up, said the water sprite father, then I'll get him. But just as he was about to go into the house to get his little boy, what was that? Suddenly it got so dark in the mill pond that you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. And the water sprite women cried out in alarm. Help! What's the matter? Oh, nothing, someone answered in a deep voice. It's just me. Hello. And who did they see when the darkness was gone again? The bogman. When he came, he had swept a good slosh of coffee-coloured moor water in front of him. That was all. Welcome to your home, called the water sprite father. We thought you were staying away. I was about to go in the house and get our little boy out. Get him, said the bogman. In the meantime I'll have a quick bite to eat. He immediately reached into the next bowl with his brown hands. It was the one with marigold stems and watercress salad in 1, 2, 3. She was empty. Then he devoured a plate and a half of steamed frog spawn with salted water fleas and then feasted on the rest of the fried fish eggs. You have to stick to it, he said, smacking his lips. Travelling whets the appetite. And so he ate and ate until the water sprite father came out again and brought the rush basket with the little boy carried. Then the moorman left his plates and bowls, jumped up and called out so enthusiastically that he almost choked. Gosh, that's a boy. And all the watermen with their wives, the fountain man and the bridge woman from the St. Nepomuc's bridge crowded around the rush basket and called out the same thing. But after a while the fountain man with the white beard raised his hand and said, Stop shouting. Now let's wish our little water sprite luck. That's right, agreed the others. And now, one after the other, they wished the little water sprite happiness and health and long life and everything that a little water sprite could need. But the moorman secretly reached into his pocket and pulled out his flute. And finally, when it was his turn, he said, Boy, you should have a happy heart. Then he quickly pursed his lips and put on the flute. Hey, how the moorman played to the little water sprite. That was funny to hear and funny to see. From every hole in the flute that he uncovered, a thin brownish thread of water always rose at the same time as the tones. And because the moorman bowed and swayed and turned while playing, the strings blew after the flute like a train, and it seemed as if they were dancing. The 13 Aquarians took the threads as an example and danced with their water sprite women at the same time. And the fountain man with the white beard and the bridge woman from the St. Nepomuc's bridge also clasped hands and turned around in a circle too. But suddenly they all stopped dead in their tracks and were amazed. They marvelled at the little water sprite. He had scrambled out of the rush basket and was now swimming happily around the bogman, rowing his arms and legs. Is that possible? Asked the water sprite father in surprise. The shirt mitts is already swimming. You can see it, said the fountain man softly and stroked his white beard. He didn't know what else to say either. Spin around, little one. The little water sprite could soon swim like a big one. He had started early enough. He also learned to speak quickly. All this happens much faster with water sprite children than with humans. It must be the water. At first the little water sprite was only allowed to swim around in the living room. Later, his parents also let him into the hallway and into the kitchen, where he looked into all the pots and pans of his mother. But most of all, he liked to swim to one of the windows, push back the curtains and look out at the green water. Sometimes the fish darted right past the panes, sometimes a smooth newt came rowing past. And sometimes he even saw his father or mother just swimming away or returning to the water sprite house. But soon little water sprite got bored of just standing behind closed windows, and he asked his father, Why can't I go outside? Yes, why? The water sprite father answered. Because you're not allowed to go outside in your shirt. That's not proper. But I'll get you something to wear. You're big enough now. The very next morning he brought the little water sprite a pair of brand new trousers with a shiny checkering and a pair of reed green ones jacket, a bright red pointed hat and of course a pair of real waterman boots made of yellow leather. Little water sprite slipped into it. Things fit like a glove. After that, the water sprite father summoned the mother. Look, he received her, proudly pointing to the little water sprite. Now we don't have a shirt, Matt. From today on we have a boy who can be seen anywhere. How do you like him? Oh, sighed the mother. It would have taken a while longer with the clothes. He's only a few weeks old. But I know, the children can't grow up fast enough for you men. Yes, replied the water sprite father, and you women, you would most like your children to hang by your apron strings for the rest of their lives. You're not crying, are you? No, no, exclaimed the water sprite mother, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm sure it just seems that way to you. Then she said, at some point the children have to grow up, of course. You're quite right about that. And the reed green jacket suits him well, our boy. Well then, said the water sprite father, why not like that? I knew that you would like the boy. Turn around, little one, so that the mother can admire you from all sides. And he took hold of the little water sprite by the shoulders and turned him. Look at the cap, he called to his mother. Doesn't it go well with the green hair? And the boots? I cobbled them together myself. They're made of the best and most expensive leather I could find. You can see that too, said the mother. The boots are particularly beautiful. But do you know what the best thing is? Asked the little water sprite. What's the best thing? The water sprite mother mused. Yes, sir, exclaimed the little water sprite beaming. The best thing is that I don't have to stay at home anymore, that I can finally go out. From now on I'll be swimming around outside all day. Aren't you at all happy about that? Then the water sprite mother said, Okay, but don't blame me. I think I have to go back to the kitchen or my soup will burn. But she only said that because she felt tears coming up again and because she didn't want to show them how difficult it was for her to let little water sprite out of the house. Crisscrossing the Moulin Wire after they had eaten their morning soup, the water sprite father said solemnly, So, now let's swim out together for the first time. Keep your eyes open, my boy, so that you can see quite a lot and so that you can tell mother everything afterwards. Are you ready? The little water sprite nodded. I can't wait any longer. Well, I understand that, said the water sprite father. But first you have to say goodbye to your mother. Little water sprite said goodbye to his mother and his mother told him to always be good at his father's side. But she asked the big water sprite, do me a favour, man, and don't forget how small our boy is. Remember, today is his first swim. Then the big water sprite and the little water sprite swim out the front door and the little water sprite swim around the water sprite a few times, alongside the big water sprite. And because the house was at the bottom of the mill pond, they could swim across it and look into the chimney from above. Mother, ye? The little water sprite called down the chimney. Do you hear me? A fish is about to swim to your kitchen window, watch out. And then he swam up close to the window himself, his eyes widened enormously. His lower lip pushed out like the fish always do, and he gaped at his mother, who was standing at the kitchen table cleaning vegetables. The mother had to laugh out loud, but the water sprite father tapped the little water sprite on the shoulder and said, Enough now. You still have time to play fish tomorrow. I think we should be on our way now. He led the little water sprite back and forth through the whole pond. The little water sprite was allowed to say hello to every fish they met. He also wanted to remember the names of the fish, but there were too many. He soon confused them. It was the same for me at the beginning, said the water sprite father Days. But it wasn't just the fish that lived in the pond. There were the newts, the snails, the mussels and worms, the beetle larvae and water fleas and all sorts of tiny little things that you could hardly see with the naked eye. Oh, thought little water sprite. Will I ever remember all their names? I can't even count them. In some places the ground was thick with mud. When the two skimmed too low, brownish clouds swirled up and the water grew dark. In other places there was gravel, which shimmered at them from afar, and in other places grass was growing. That was pond grass. It blew across the floor in long tufts and looked like a carpet of water sprite hair. But what the little water sprites liked best were the forests of mermaids' weed and bond threads, water feathers and water lily, which proliferated in the depths of the pond. Don't you dare go in, you'll get stuck. The water sprite father just managed to call out. Then he saw how the boy disappeared upside down into the thicket of stems and leaves. Are you going to stay here? The father called after him and tried to grab the runaway by the feet. But the boy was faster than him and the water sprite father only kept his left boot in his hand. It rustled and splashed in the thicket for a while, then it became quiet. From somewhere out of the creeper forest, the little water sprite squeaked, Where am I? Then the water sprite father weighed down the empty boot with a stone so that it could not swim away from it, and willy-nilly went to look for the boy. The carp Cyprinus the two mermen played hide and seek together in the creepers until the boy was crimson in the face and could hardly gasp. Then the water sprite father said, Now we want to stop again. because otherwise you will overexert yourself, and because then the mother will scold us when we come home." But the little water sprite begged, "Just one more time." "All right, then one more time to break the habit," said the water sprite father, and added, "But you can't get me around a second time, then it's definitely over for today." Little water sprite wanted to make it particularly difficult for his father to find him this time, so he dug as deep into the 1,000 leaf stalks and water quills as he could. But suddenly he realised with horror that he was trapped. The creepers wouldn't let him go. He tried to kick himself free, but that didn't help. On the contrary, it only got more and more entangled in the green ball. Then the little water sprite became scared and afraid, and he cried out imploringly for help. "Yes, just fidget," his father replied. "I'm not even thinking of helping you out. I should think of that. Please help yourself out. I'll just let you get stuck." But water sprite father didn't mean that seriously. Never in his life would he have left his little water sprite stuck. He just thought to himself, "Let him kick around for a while, the rascal. That can only do him good. At least he won't be so cheeky another time." And finally, when he saw that the boy really couldn't manage it himself, he took him by the little slit and jerked a couple of times, and whoosh, he was helped. The little water sprite had struggled righteously. He had to sit down first. Ugh, was he tired? He put his head in his hands and gasped. The tassel of the red-pointed hat dangled in his face. The water sprite father watched him for a while as he sat there, gasping for breath. Then he said reproachfully, "See, that's what you get for not wanting to stop yet. I would never have cared allowed to enter. How am I supposed to take you home now? You can't even stand up anymore, let alone swim." "Oh, just let me," said the little water sprite with difficulty. "I just have to catch my breath for a while and then I'll be fine." But the water sprite father didn't really believe in it. Who knows how hard the journey home would have been for him and the boy if luck had not sent the carp Cyprinus to help them. Unsuspectingly he swam along, the carp Cyprinus. He was already an old man, had moss on his back, and loved to bubble quietly to himself while he was swimming. Each time he bubbled, an air bubble rose from his round carp mouth. Then Cyprinus rolled his eyes and looked after her. He didn't notice the merman until he almost bumped his nose into his shoulder. "Now," Cyprinus exclaimed in surprise, wiggling his fins. "What's the matter with you guys? It seems to me someone can't go on." "Oh, look, Cyprinus the carp," said the water sprite father. He pointed to his boy and said sadly, "Too tired to swim home. If only I knew how to bring him home again." Then the carp said pensively to Cyprinus, "Blub blub," and then he let the water sprite father tell the story. He listened to him attentively until he had finished. He finally said, "I guess I got there at the right time, blub blub. I'll take the little water man on my back and carry it home. Deal, blub blub." "Are you serious?" exclaimed the water sprite father, relieved. "That would be wonderful." "Well, listen, you know me," said Cyprinus, almost a little offended. "If I say I'll carry the boy home, then I'll do it. I'm sure you won't mind." "No, quite the opposite," said the water sprite father. "You're doing me a huge favour." "It's okay," Cyprinus interrupted him. "One helps where one can. That's not worth mentioning. Better see to it that the boy finally settles down." Little water sprite had to sit up and big water sprite showed him how to hold on. Then he was allowed to ride leisurely home on the back of the carp Cyprinus. "Do you like it?" Cyprinus asked after a while. "Yes, very much," exclaimed the little water sprite, excited. "Promise that you will take me with you again." "Yes, I promise," said the carp, the animal with the many eyes. Such a mill pond is not particularly big, but as a small waterman you can still experience a lot in it, especially when you're curious enough to poke your nose into every nook and cranny, under every rock and in every mud hole and everywhere else. The water sprite mother didn't like it when the father let the little water sprite roam around in the pond unsupervised. But the water sprite said, "But he's a boy. A boy has to get used to the fact that you can't always be after him. Besides, I really have other things to do than keep walking your boy." That was just fine with the little water man. He loved to roam the pond on his own. Every day he was on the road from morning to night. Soon he knew all the fish and snails and mussels by name. If he met the carp Cyprinus, he was always allowed to ride a bit through the water on his back. He played catch with the minnows, he plucked the frogs by their long legs. Sometimes he would grab a few newts for fun, put them in his red stocking cap and let them wriggle in it for a while. Every day the little water sprite took a different corner of the pond and rummaged through it to see if there was another animal or someone else that he had previously overlooked living there. That's how he came to the cave in which he discovered the animal with the many eyes. The cave was dark. At first he thought that the animal with the many eyes was a huge pale worm. But then he saw the fins on his back, and from that he knew it was a fish that bore one circular eye behind the other in a long row on either side of the body. "What are you looking at?" the fish with the many eyes asked the little merman. "Don't you know that I'm the lamprey? How do you like me? You're ugly." "I'm scared," the little water sprite wanted to answer, but he didn't do that. Rather, he said, "So your name is Lamprey? I know you envy me," said the lamprey. "Just admit it." "Envy you?" asked the little water sprite, very surprised. "What for?" "Well, about the many eyes. You only have two." "I see." The lamprey snapped its way up to the boy. "Only 2 eyes? How few." "I'm satisfied with both of them," declared the little water sprite. "They're quite enough for me." "We hope so," said the lamprey. "But what's the matter? You don't want to swim away again?" "Stay here." "No, I'm in a hurry," the little water sprite said quickly and took his leave. Get out of the cave. He'd had enough of the fish with the many eyes. He wanted to hurry home. "I'd like to give you a couple of eyes," the lamprey cried maliciously after him. "All but 2 of them are blind anyway." "What use are blind eyes to me? I want to give them away, do you hear? I want to give them away, she." The little merman didn't answer. He covered his ears while swimming. Nothing like home. And don't forget anything like the fish with the many eyes. He still saw him in his mind, and it disgusted him. That night he dreamed that the fish with the many eyes came into his bedroom. He couldn't shout and couldn't move, because he was very stiff, as stiff as the bedpost. He had to put up with whatever the multi-eyed fish did to him. He heard tell him, "There you have a pair of blind eyes that I can't use. One here, one there, one there." And he felt the terrible fish put its ugly, round eyes on him, one on his forehead, and one on each cheek, and one on his chin. And the next one is on the tip of your nose, my friend. So, let's see you. You look fine, almost like a real lamprey. "No," the little water sprite cried out. "Get those eyes out of my face. Take them away, you." "I can move now, I can, but boy, what's the matter with you?" asked the water sprite father, leaning over the bed. "You're screaming like you're being killed. Did you have a bad dream like that?" "Something terrible," groaned the little water sprite. "It was something terrible. I was to become a lamprey." "A lamprey," said the water sprite father, and listened to the whole story. Then he stroked the little water sprite hair. "You know what?" he suggested. "I think you should sleep in my bed for the rest of the night. But we'd better not tell the mother about the fish with the many eyes and that you had such a terrible dream. Otherwise she tells me again, you're still too small to stroll through the pond alone." They don't have webbed feet either. The days came, the days went. Every day the sun shone a little longer over the mill pond, and every day the little water sprite got a little older. One morning the water sprite father said to him, "Come with me, my boy, we want to swim to shore. It's time you stuck your nose out." So they swam to shore, and the little water sprite stuck his head out of the water for the first time in his life. But he immediately withdrew it. "Why are you doing this?" asked the water sprite father. The little water sprite rubbed his eyes. "It blinds me," he said. "Is it always this bright up there?" "It's always so bright up there when the sun is out," the water sprite father replied. "But you'll get used to it. All you have to do is squint when you surface and you'll be fine. Or, even better, put your hands up, like this." And he showed the little water sprite how to put his hands in front of his face. They showed up for the second time. The little water sprite blinked cautiously through the webbed fingers. He only knew the warm, golden green twilight of the mill pond. The full sunlight hurt him. But slowly, very slowly, his eyes got used to it, and he looked around curiously. "Look at those funny little fishes over there," he called out first. "Those aren't little fish," said the water sprite father. "They're to dragonflies." "But they swim," said the little merman. "No," explained the water sprite father. "They fly. That's different. Some things are different up here. The water in particular is different," said the little water sprite. "Don't you notice that it's different too? Lighter and warmer and thinner." "That's not water," the father replied with a smile. "What then?" cried the boy, puzzled. "It's air," answered the father. "Air," repeated the boy. "What's this?" "Something you can't swim in," said the water sprite father. He made a way for the little water sprite through the reeds that stood on the shore, and the little water sprite followed him. When they had the reeds behind them, the little water sprite's eyes widened. Then he saw a meadow for the first time, flowers for the first time, a tree for the first time, and he felt for the first time what it's like when the wind blows and ruffles your hair. Everything was different up here than down in the pond with them. Everything he saw was new and amazing. He asked the father about it, and the father explained everything to him as best he knew. Then suddenly the little water sprite held out his hand. "A water sprite," he exclaimed happily. "But what a big one." "Where?" asked the water sprite father, narrowing his eyes to get a better look. "Over there," the boy said. He pointed to a figure coming over the hill. "See him?" "Yes," answered the father. "I see him, but he's not a waterman." "There are several," said the boy. "It must be a whole family. They're coming down the hill in a line. I'll call them." "No, stop it," the water sprite father rebuked him. "They're people. They don't need to discover us. We want to crawl into the reeds." Then they both hid in the reeds. The people, a man, a woman and 2 children, passed very close to them and saw neither the big water sprite nor the small one. But the 2 mermen saw the people all the better from their hiding place. And the little one water sprite was surprised because the people were so tall and didn't have green hair. "They don't have webs either," said the water sprite father in a low voice. "Some of them can swim, but they swim very slowly. And if they jump into the water, they have to come up right away." "Strange," said the little water sprite thoughtfully. "Why do they have to?" "Because they are just people," said the water sprite father. "They can't live in water." Little water sprite felt sorry for the people and thought, how good it is that I'm in water sprite. The greenhouses from now on. The little water sprite was always allowed to accompany him when his father went ashore. And when he knew his way up there a little, the water sprite father sometimes let him up alone. But don't run too far away, the parents had impressed on the little water sprite. And above all, he should be careful of the people so that they didn't spot him. He had to promise his parents that. There was an old willow tree on the bank of the mill pond. She leaned over the pond, her lowest branches almost touching the water. Because it was so crooked, it wasn't difficult for little water sprite to climb up onto the old willow tree. He thought, I have a good hiding place up there. When I sit in the branches, I can look over to the mill on one side and to the roofs of the human village on the other side. But nobody sees me when I sit up there. And should someone see me, what does it matter? I just let myself flop into the water and that's it. Little water sprite often climbed the old willow. He sat astride a branch, dangling his legs, and rejoiced when the wind came and rocked him. And if the wind didn't come, he wasn't sad about it either, he just rocked himself. The little waterman never got tired of sitting in his hiding place on the old pasture and looking out. He saw the miller and his servants carrying the heavy sacks of grain to the milling house. He saw the miller's wife feeding her chickens and pigeons in the yard. He watched the two maids doing the laundry or scalding the big wooden butter churn. Over on the country road, craftsmen and market women went their way. Every morning the school children ran into the village and soon after the noon bell he saw them coming back. Sometimes a farm wagon rumbled along the road. Then he heard the rumble of the wheels from afar. When the carter cracked his whip quite loudly, the little water sprite would click his tongue and think, I'd like to try that too. Yes, on the country road over there was always something for the little waterman to see. But how wide his eyes widened when one day the little greenhouses drove up. 3 little houses drove up, with real windows and doors. The houses were painted green and went on wheels. A small, shaggy horse trotted in front of each of the greenhouses, and behind the last house a large, shaggy dog padded. He wore a ring through his nose and was chained to the cottage. 3 human men in wide slouch hats drove the horses. A 4th walked beside the shaggy dog and from time to time slapped him with a stick. Little water sprite was surprised that there were little houses on wheels. He would have liked to see her up close. But while he was still debating whether he should jump down from his pasture and run to the country road the little greenhouses turned into the meadow and drove to the mill pond. They stopped just before the old pasture. Dry feet. The human men unharnessed the horses and tied their front feet together with ropes. Then they let the horses do what they wanted. The horses ran a little way into the meadow and began to eat grass. In the meantime, a few women and children had climbed out of the greenhouses. They all had brown faces and brown shoulders and brown legs and arms. The women wore glittering earrings, the children wore torn shirts, and everyone, even the men, had long, charcoal hair. They looked very different from the people little water sprite had seen before. The women fetched dry reeds and lit a fire. Then they hung a dented cauldron over the flames and made soup. The children ran to and fro between the little greenhouses. Some played hide and seek, some scuffled, all together yelling like hell. The men sat a little apart in the sun, smoking short pipes and telling stories. After the meal, one man fetched the big, shaggy dog that had run behind the last little house and had a ring through his nose. The man banged his fingers on a small drum, and the big dog stood on its hind paws and danced along. It looked very funny the way he was groping around and growling. When he had danced for a while, he was allowed to rest and was rewarded with a lump of sugar. Then he had to stand on his hind paws again and continue dancing. The little water sprite sat on the old pasture and never got tired of watching the strangers and their giant dog. Once he thought he heard his father calling him, but he didn't pay attention. He didn't answer and stayed seated. The sun was already low in the sky when the strange men caught their horses and hitched them back to the little greenhouses. The women and children got in, the big dog had to be chained, and then the little houses with Who and Hot drove back onto the streets and rumbled away. The little water sprite watched them until they disappeared behind the hills. He suddenly noticed that he was very weak. When he got home, the water sprite mother asked, "Where have you been?" But before he could answer anything else, she clasped her hands over her head and cried out in horror, "How you look! Your feet are very dry." Little water sprite looked down at his feet. Had they really dried up sitting in the old pasture for so long, in the sun and wind? Oh, he was in such a miserable mood. Everything was spinning before his eyes. "You're about to take off your boots," his mother snapped at him. "Don't you know that you get sick if you get dry feet? Why didn't you come home in time? Go to bed with yourself. But hurry up." She tucked the little water sprite into bed as quickly as possible and put a wet wrap around his feet. The little water sprite, his eyes closed and he fell asleep. When the water sprite father came home, the water sprite mother said, "But you should have told him that as a water sprite you can't stay out in the air all day. How is the boy supposed to know? If he gets sick now, it's your fault." The water sprite father rubbed his chin in embarrassment and said, Yes, but let's wait and see if he really gets as sick as you fear. And water sprite boy who never comes home dry feet isn't an water sprite boy. Rain, where are you as a punishment?" The little water sprite had to stay at home for a few days, so begging and begging didn't help him. He thought sullenly, "If only I had at least gotten really sick, but I didn't even get a cold. Mother is far too anxious about me. If she had her way, I wouldn't be allowed to leave at all." And longingly he looked out of the windows of the water sprite house. Finally, after almost a week, the water sprite father said, "I put in a good word for you with your mother, boy. Today it's raining upstairs. I want to let you out again. But do you promise me you'll come back in time?" "Oh yes, I promise you that." The little water sprite cried eagerly and immediately slipped into his boots. "I certainly don't want to get dry feet again. That should be difficult for you today, too," said the water sprite father. "Today the rain will ensure that you stay wet." "The rain? Who is that?" the little water sprite wanted to know. "Yes, you see," the water sprite father replied. "The rain. That's our best friend. If it weren't for rain, there wouldn't be a single water sprite left in the world." And why not? Little water sprite would have liked to know more, but then he heard his mother coming and said to himself, "Let's get out now. It's better if I get them in time." And he did. Whoops. He was outside, darting away around the corner of the water sprite house. Hey, was it nice to be zipping through the water again? It now seemed to him as if he had been sitting in the room for an eternity. Out of sheer joy and high spirits, he immediately swam across the entire pond and back again. Then the fish darted to the side, the mud whirled up, the pond grass blew behind it, and the mussels snapped their shells shut in horror. "So," cried the little water sprite when he had let off steam, and now up. Slowly, because he was out of breath, he let himself get on. The water around him grew warmer and lighter. "Close your eyes," he thought, "lest the sun blind me again." But when he was up there and carefully opened his eyes, he wasn't greeted by a painful, bright light like on other days. The sun was nowhere to be seen. The sky was overcast as if with grey cloth, and all around the little water sprite huge amounts of tiny stones were falling from somewhere from high up into the water. It was as if someone was throwing sand on the pond with their hands full. Every time a pebble fell into the water, it splashed, and the splashing never stopped because there were so many pebbles that came pattering down. The little merman held out his hands flat, trying to catch some of the pebbles. But then he soon realised that they were drops. He liked it because they tickled him. Sometimes a drop even hit his nose, which he found particularly amusing. But then he suddenly remembered the rain his father had told him about. That's right, the rain. He had to say hello right away. He was her best friend. And he thought the rain was some kind of water sprite or something like that, and he decided to look for it. He'll probably be on the bank, he told himself, sitting there somewhere. But how amazed was the little water sprite when he stepped onto land. Because today everything that used to be dry was wonderfully wet. The grass and the stones, the path and the bushes, the flowers, the field and the bushes. The leaves of the old willow were dripping wet. The water ran down the trunk. The bark had turned dark and glistened. The little water sprite took a deep breath. Ah, how they are tasty today. She tasted of damp earth and rotting wood, of herbs and wet leaves. And it was also very pleasantly cool. A single great noise filled the whole world. And the little water sprite thought, that's how it should always be, that's how I like it. And he also thought, today there is no danger, today I will definitely not get dry feet. But where is the rain now? The little water sprite looked around the bank, but there was no one to be seen anywhere, not a human being or an animal, nobody at all. So he had no choice but to crawl under the dripping bushes and look to see if the rain hadn't hidden there somewhere in the end. But try as he might, he did not find him, not under the bushes and not in the reeds. So he decided to call the rain. Hey, he called loudly through cupped hands. Hey, rain, where are you? He pricked up his ears and listened for an answer, but all he could hear was the noise all around. And then there was a splashing sound from the pond, just as if someone was stepping out of the water. That's him. The little water sprite snapped. That must be him. He turned around. But he was not a little disappointed, because he saw his own father in front of him, just stepping onto the bank. But boy, said the water sprite, father, what are you doing? What am I doing? Repeated the little water sprite sadly. I've been looking for the rain and now I'm calling it. But the rain doesn't answer. I almost think it's gone. The water sprite had to laugh. Who are you looking for? The rain. Oh boy, you're standing in the middle of it all the time? Yes, that's what happens, he added with a smile. That's what happens when you can't listen to your father until he's finished telling something. The wooden box almost every day in the summer. People big and small from the village came to the mill pond to bathe in it. The carp cyprinus didn't like that at all. He thought they should stay at home. But the little water sprite enjoyed hiding in the shore bushes and watching them bathe. None of them could swim very well together, these people. Some swam like frogs, others just dog trot, and everyone kept their heads above water while swimming. It was a funny picture how the many red human faces swam around the mill pond, puffing and panting. But the floating people looked even funnier from below. When the little water sprite ducked under and rolled onto his back, he saw them gliding overhead as wriggling shadows. Their bodies stood out clearly against the sunlit surface of the pond. The little water sprite found it very amusing how they twisted their limbs and yet only got so slowly from the spot. As he lay on his back in the mud once again and looked up at the people, a clumsy black thing suddenly pushed up there that he had never seen before. The thing swam over him like a giant fish, but it had no fins and no tail. He couldn't understand how the thing managed to stay still and still move forward. He thought, I really have to see this. The little water sprite swam to shore and surfaced. Then he saw that this strange thing was a long wooden box, in which sat a human man, and the human man was the miller. He held a pole in each hand, with which he rowed the wooden box across the pond. Then the little water sprite remembered that he had often seen the box before. That's right, it used to lie in the reeds, and to this day he had taken it for a kind of wash trough. But now he knew that you could drive it around on the water. Actually not wrong, thought the little water sprite, and watched how the miller moved the two poles. I have to remember that, he decided, because he wanted to try a ride in the wooden box as soon as it was possible. The next day around noon, when the people were all eating in their houses, things seemed propitious to little water sprite. The box lay in the old place in the reeds. He was tied down, but that didn't matter. The little water man couldn't untie the knot, but he quickly pulled the stake out of the soft ground, put it under his arm and climbed in. But where were the two poles that the miller had rowed with? He couldn't find her anywhere. Apparently the miller had taken them with him. That was too stupid. How was he supposed to cross the pond if he didn't have the poles? Little water sprite thought for a while. Then he took the stake and tried to row with it. But that didn't work. He now sat down on the back edge of the box, dipped the stake in the shallow water and pushed himself off a couple of times with its help. The wooden box pushed its way clumsily through the reeds. The stalks bent to the side, rustling and crackling. After a few jolts the box reached the open water. But now the mill pond got deeper and soon the little water sprite found no more reason. The stake was too short. A nice story. The little water sprite thought angrily. What's the use of the whole box if I can't get any further? I'm going to get a longer stick from the shore. He was just about to jump into the water and swim back when he noticed that the box wasn't lying still. A light wind blew across the pond from the land and drove it leisurely on. Little water sprite was very happy about that. He ran to the top of the box and leaned over the edge. I have to see, he thought curiously, how the mill pond looks from above. Couldn't I spot old Cyprinus down there, or the water sprite house? But no matter how hard he looked down, all he could see was the blue sky reflected in the water, the top of the wooden box, and above the top the head of an water sprite boy. Bug. said the little water sprite, sticking his tongue out at the water sprite boy in the water. He imagined what it would be like if he had a brother. To console himself for not having one, he made faces at himself. That was a fun game. That's why he soon had to drive this wooden box again. "Haida, you little rascal." It suddenly rang out from the shore boating around in the pond. The miller, the little water sprite, snapped. "But let's go down now." He threw himself head over heels into the pond. When he jumped, he gave the wooden box such a push that the water sloshed into it. Frightened, he immediately swam to the bottom of the mill pond and lay flat on the ground. But after a while the oat stung him again. He thought, how will the miller manage to get the box back? Shouldn't I look? I'll stick my nose out quickly, but of course in such a way that the miller doesn't notice me. The little water sprite swam to the shore bushes and, hidden by their branches, stuck his head out of the water. Then he saw the miller standing on the bank wringing his hands and calling for help. "Help!" he shouted. "Help! A little boy just fell into the water. Help! Help!" It wasn't long before the mill hands came running to his shouting. "Get poles!" gasped the miller. "A child fell into the water. It fell out of the boat. Come on, hurry up now, or it'll drown." One of the servants ran back to the mill, the other two got into the water and pulled the wooden box onto the bank. When one had brought the poles, all four sat down in the box and rowed out to the pond. The servants searched the ground with their poles. The miller wiped the sweat from his forehead with his handkerchief. "Oh God," he groaned. "He fell in before my eyes. The boy. The misfortune. The misfortune." "Who was it?" asked the servants. "I don't know," said the miller. "Things happened so terribly quickly with the poor boy. He was wearing a red cap and yellow boots, if I'm not mistaken. But what are we talking about? Better keep looking." "Yes, look for me," the little water sprite thought gleefully. "Just seek." That's what you get from the fact that the miller doesn't begrudge other people driving the wooden box. The slide party at the lower end of the mill pond was a sluice. The lock had a gate. This gate was made of beams. When the miller turned an iron crank over the sluice gate, it rose inch by inch out of the water, and if he turned it the other way around, inch by inch it sank back into the water. The miller, the water sprite father, had explained to the water sprite boy, the miller only ever lets out as much water through this gate as he needs for his mill. The lock gate is very important to us, because if the gate wasn't there, then we would soon be stranded. The carp Cyprinus was always anxious not to get too close to the lock gate. He said quite frankly, "It's far too dangerous for me there. If the water gushing out from under the gate gets a hold of you, you're done for. It pulls you along, whether you want it or not." "Oh, what?" The little water sprite contradicted him once. "If you start it smart enough, nothing can happen. What will you give me if I let myself be washed away?" "Only not that," Cyprinus defended, startled. "You're probably out of your mind. Let yourself be washed away." "Yes, sir," cried the little water sprite. "Do you think I'm scared? Watch out, here we go." And to the friend's horror, he swam straight for the floodgate, which was half open. When he realised that the current had caught him, he let himself drift. All the fins of the brave Cyprinus bristled. In 1,000 fears he cried, "Back, back. Are you insane, boy?" In the desperation, he swam after the little water sprite, and it wasn't far from being caught in the current himself. Lucky that he was able to stop just in time. He bubbled, wailing, behind the little water sprite. The boy. Out of sheer madness he kills himself. He doesn't seem to know, poor thing, what he's got himself into. But little water sprite knew that pretty well. Unlike Cyprinus, he didn't only know the mill pond from the inside. Hadn't he been to the shore often enough to look around? He knew that beyond this sluice gate began a narrow, open gully with a wooden floor and wooden walls. The water that shot out from under the gate tumbled down this gully to the mill, where it disappeared into a wooden shed with a great deal of noise. However, the little water sprite did not know what was in store for him if the water swept him into the mill. But he had no intention of trying it either. He just wanted to scare his friend the carp Cyprinus a bit. He thought to himself, "When I get to the gate, I'll quickly stretch out my arms and hold onto it. Then I'll climb comfortably to the bank and have a laugh. I'd have to be pretty stupid if I really let myself be driven out. That would be too dangerous, even for me." So that's how it was. Good Cyprinus was beside himself with horror at little water sprite, and little water sprite was just joking with him. The water flowed faster and faster, and the faster he drove toward the open gate, the better the waterman boy liked it. The water brushed his body like a strong wind. It ruffled his jacket and the green hair that poked out from under the stocking cap. Be careful not to miss the gate. There it was. The little water sprite stretched out his arms, grabbed the bottom beam and already thought, "Good, I've got it." But the beam was way too slippery. That's what the algae that had settled there did. As if someone had smeared him with soft soap, he attacked himself. The little water sprite found no footing. He slipped off, feet first. On his back, he slipped under the sluice gate into the gully. Hold on, he thought, hold on. But what use was that to him? Oh, that didn't do him any good. It didn't help that he thought, if only I had listened to the carp cyprinus. No, it was all for nothing. The little water sprite darted through the wooden gutter like a pike. He saw a few green shadows sweep by trees. He saw a few white spots scurrying across the sky, clouds. In the distance, he heard the roar of the water rushing into the mill behind the wooden partition. The roar drew nearer, grew louder, louder and louder and louder. The little waterman's head was already pounding away. It's over, was all he could think. He stiffened, held his breath, waited. Now, a wall of boards came toward him, opened, and swallowed him. It was suddenly night. It thundered, bubbled, hissed. Then the little water sprite felt himself flying a little through the air. It rolled over a couple of times and immediately tumbled down. The mill wheel had taken him away. Yes, that was bad. A human boy who would hardly have survived the slide over the mill wheel with his skin intact. He would have broken at least a number of ribs and possibly even his neck. But a water sprite can withstand a little more. He won't break his neck that easily, and certainly not if he falls into the water. But where else would the little water sprite fall when he fell off the mill wheel? He fell from the water into the water. And that was his luck. At first, of course, he was scared to death. He didn't know what had happened to him. To be on the safe side, he quickly swam back out into the open, into the sun. Get out of the dark shack, was his first thought. His second thought was that the ride on the mill wheel wasn't actually that bad. On the contrary, afterwards you could really enjoy it. How about, thought the little water sprite, if I tried that again right away? And that was his third thought. 25. So, by chance, little water sprite had discovered a wonderful new game. He let himself slide down the gully a couple of times in a row and rumble over the mill wheel. He had hardly reached the bottom when he climbed one or two back onto the bank, ran around the mill, ran across the meadows back to the mill pond, jumped headfirst into the water and slid down again. He slipped many more times. This day and the next day and all the following days. He slipped this way and that, on his stomach, on his back, stretched out or curled up like a hedgehog. Now he slipped his hands in his pockets, now he folded his arms behind his head. Sometimes he drove cross-legged, sometimes on all fours. Then again, when the rattle grabbed him, he also did a few somersaults during the ride. His highlight was pulling his feet up to the tip of his nose and barreling down the gully bit first. It's just a pity that he didn't have any spectators. And it's also a pity, even a pity, that the miller only cranked the sluice gate halfway up and no further. Because, thought the little water sprite, if he cranked it up further, a lot more water could run down the channel. And if more water ran down the gully, then it would be possible to slide again as quickly. I'm going way too slow. And he hoped from day to day that the miller would wind up the lock gate quite far. But the miller never thought of doing that. And the little water sprite finally said to himself, "Fine, if the miller doesn't do it himself, then I'll do it." He waited until Sunday. On Sundays, the little water sprite knew the people who lived in the mill went to church. Once they were all out of the house, he could do whatever he wanted without being disturbed. And that's right, on Sunday morning, when the bells began to ring in the village, the mill door opened and the miller's wife came out with the hymn book under her arm. Behind the miller's wife came the mill hands, behind the mill hands came the two maids, and behind the two maids came the miller himself as the very last. He was wearing a good jacket with the silver buttons, and today he wore a high black hat instead of his flory miller's cap. Little water sprite almost didn't recognise him. The little water sprite was squatting in the reeds at the lower end of the mill pond, right next to the sluice gate. He never let the miller and his people out of his sight. He saw the miller take a large key from his jacket pocket and lock the mill door. Then the whole company made a pilgrimage up the little meadow path in a row. The miller's wife went in front, behind them the mill hands, and behind them the two maids. At the end of the procession walked the miller in his handsome blue jacket with silver buttons. Everyone made happy Sunday faces, and the little water sprite in his reed hiding place also made a happy face. Unsuspectingly, the millers passed him by. He saw her legs right in front of his nose. He could have easily pinched her calves if he wanted to, but he couldn't give himself away. The sluice gate was down, the gully was empty, and the mill wheel stood still. The millers rumbled across the lock on the narrow plank bridge. The miller gave the iron crank a quick tug to make sure the gate stayed shut. Then he followed the others with big strides. The little water sprite waited until the millers had disappeared between the fields. But even then he waited a while, and only when he knew that they must be at church soon, he climbed out of hiding and set to work. It was a slog with a locked gate. The little water sprite tugged at the iron crank for half an eternity. He tugged with all his might, but she didn't move. The little water sprite took off his jacket. He spat on his hands. He took a deep breath. He often had to spit on his hands and take many more deep breaths. It finally worked. The iron crank gave way, squeaking and squeaking. The locked gate slowly rose. The first water gurgled through the gap into the gutter. Well then, thought the little water sprite and took a breather. But then he grabbed it again, and now the work was much easier. The little waterman turned and turned. Right hand, left hand, right hand, left hand. The iron crank never came to rest. The water gurgled louder and louder under the sluice gate. Now the gurgling became a murmur. Now the murmuring became a roar. It wasn't long before the mill wheel began to rattle in the distance. Clip, clap, it began. Clip, snap. And it sounded pretty sleepy. But after a while it went like this. Clip, clap, clip, clap, clip, clap. And again after a while. Clap, 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 clap. At last there was only a single rattle to be heard. Rat-a-tut-tut-tut-tut-tut-tut-tut-tut-tut. You can't speak that fast. The good miller would probably have been struck on the spot if he had had to hear that. But the miller was in church. Thank God, he couldn't hear it. And the little water sprite happily continued to crank. He cranked the locked gate all the way up, so high that it couldn't go any further. The water rushed and roared at his feet, filling the wooden gutter to the very top. That's right. Now it had to be at least twice as fast when he jumped in. The little water sprite threw himself headfirst off the lock bridge. The water took hold of him. He shot like an arrow through the gutter onto the mill wheel, and hey presto, down. As soon as he could count to 3, he was down. Oh yes, he liked that. That's what he always wanted. So don't hesitate. Get out of the shack, around the mill, back through the meadows and immediately back, splash, from the bridge into the water. This happened a dozen times and more, until suddenly, as if he had grown out of the ground, the water sprite father stood in front of him. Did it be you? He asked angrily and pointed to the cranked up sluice gate. Do you have words? That rascal is draining the pond. Wait a minute, my little boy, I want to drive that out of you. Over here. The water sprite father caught the boy by the collar. With his left hand he held it tight. With his right he began to wind down the lock gate again. What are you thinking? He continued to scold. We're all supposed to dry up, aren't we? The pond is already half empty. And why? Because little Mr. Warman is doing nonsense and is running the sluice wide open. Little boy, that cost you 25. The water sprite father kept his word. When the sluice was closed, he draped the struggling little water sprite over his knee and faithfully paid him the promised 25. Habba. Haboo. The little water sprite collected everything that people carelessly threw into the mill pond. Tin cans, light bulbs, leaking wooden slippers and other valuable things. He hid them under the stones behind the water sprite house. Over time, all sorts of riches accumulated in his treasury, and one day the little water sprite proudly showed them to his friend, the carp Cyprinus. Cyprinus looked at the individual pieces from the back and front. Then he mockingly twisted his mouth and explained, All that's right, my dear, but what do you do with a bottomless pot with a handle, for example? And what about that old rusty poker there? You also have a hole in your left shoe, I see. And you seem to have a few dozen bottles of beer in stock. I find beer bottles quite often. Unfortunately, most of them jumped, said the little water sprite. But that doesn't matter, I'll keep them anyway. And for what, if I may ask? Inquired the carp Cyprinus. For what? Repeated the little water sprite, surprised. It would never have occurred to him to ask. He hastily searched for an answer. While he was still thinking, Cyprinus said, Well, you see, there we have it. Not on say you know what you're actually picking up all that junk for. It's all useless stuff. You should throw it away. Throw it away. The little water sprite snapped. That's out of the question. You'll have to leave that to me. Very well, said Cyprinus. I'm not going to interrupt you. It's up to you. If you enjoy collecting junk, then please do. I certainly wouldn't, not just in the water since yesterday. Cyprinus let out a few bubbles to show that he had nothing more to add. Then he swam away for this time. The little water sprite looked after him angrily. You can talk as much as you want, he called after him, but you won't be able to put off my beautiful things in the rest of your life. and secretly he hoped for an opportunity to convince Cyprinus that something could be done with his riches after all. He didn't have to wait long for it. Less than 3 days had passed when he next met Cyprinus. The old man made a bitter face and kept bubbling to himself. The little water sprite did not understand what he said, but he saw that they were definitely not friendly words. "Cyprinus," he called out to him. "Yeah, what's the matter with you?" "Oh, never mind," he got the answer. "I'm annoyed." "That you're annoyed," said the little water sprite. "A blind man can see. But what about the fellow with the fishing rod?" Cyprinus gasped for water indignantly. "It's a shame you can't eat that fellow, sitting there on the bank waiting for a bite. I wonder if that's not a reason, getting sick. Eat him up if I could." "You can't eat him up," said the little water sprite. "Neither can I, but maybe I could do something else." So, the carp Cyprinus bubbled slowly and looked at the little water sprite in disbelief. "And that would be..." Wait, said the little water sprite, wanting to surprise Cyprinus. The carp had to show him where the fishing line with the hook was hanging in the water. Then he told the old man to swim closer to shore and see what would happen to the angler. "I can't tell you more now," he explained with a wink. "It's a secret." So Cyprinus swam closer to shore and waited. He squinted suspiciously at the human man holding the fishing pole across the pond. There was a bucket next to the human man. Occasionally water would spill out. "He must have caught a few of us already," thought Cyprinus with horror. "It must be bad, wriggling in the bucket like that. Hope someone else doesn't bite him." But no sooner had Cyprinus thought that than he saw the human man suddenly narrow his eyes and duck. Then, with a mighty jerk, he yanked back his fishing rod. "Oh, I'm in." It went through marrow and bones of good Cyprinus. "There he is again, that dreadful fellow. And the likes of us have to see it too." Something flew to the bank in a high arc and landed with a splash in the grass. The human man immediately threw himself in his catch with great zeal. But whoops, that wasn't a fish he had fished up this time. That was... The carp Cyprinus gaped in amazement. That was a hole in the left shoe. Yes, indeed, a ragged, holy left shoe was hanging on the fish hook. Then the carp Cyprinus saw the light. Of course, he knew immediately how the shoe had gotten on the hook. But the human man didn't know that. How was he supposed to know? At first he looked puzzled, then he started to rant. Angrily he untied the shoe and threw it back into the pond. He pulled a tin box from the top of his boot, pulled out a fat earthworm, speared it on the hook and cast his line again. "Good luck," Cyprinus bubbled. "I'm curious to see what you'll fish up this time." For a change, it wasn't a shoe that the human man pulled ashore a while later, but an old, rusted poker. How then, the human man scolded. The carp Cyprinus licked that. He waggled his fins gleefully and thought to himself, "You're going to lose the joy of fishing, my dear. Let's see what's next." The human man threw out his fishing rod 7 more times, and each time the thing seemed more bewitched to him. After the poker he caught an empty beer bottle. After the beer bottle he picked up a runaway wooden slipper. Then, in turn, he pulled out of the pond a perforated sieve, a mousetrap, a grater, and a dented lampshade. But the last time, a bottomless pot with a handle hung on its hinge, and in the pot with the handle was the little water sprite. He had pulled his red-pointed cap down over his forehead, was thrashing his arms and legs wildly and roared, "Habba, habua-oo." That sounded horrible. The human man dropped his fishing rod in horror and ran. What you had can, you do what you can do. On the way he lost the tin box with the worms. He didn't even pay attention. He ran like the devil was breathing down his neck. Without looking back, he disappeared. So, the little water sprite cried happily and slipped out of his pot with a handle. "I guess we won't see him again anytime soon. What do you think, Cyprinus?" "I mean," said the carp thoughtfully, "you gave him that wonderfully. A great waterman couldn't have done that better either. But when without the useless junk," said the little water sprite, laughing and tapping his knuckle in his bottomless saucepan, "it wouldn't have been so easy." "Oh yes," bubbled Cyprinus, "I see that you were right. Just keep collecting junk. I'll be careful not to scoff at it again." "Well, if you just see it, then everything's all right," said the little water sprite, self-satisfied. "I can swim to shore with peace of mind." "To the shore?" Cyprinus asked in surprise. "What do you want there?" "First, break the fishing rod," explained the little water sprite. "Second, take the poor fellows who are wriggling around in the bucket so miserably back into the pond. And thirdly, I want to get the tin box that fishing guy lost and give the remaining earthworms to a certain Cyprinus for lunch." "But no," exclaimed Cyprinus, touched. Yes, cried the little water sprite. "And I hope you like them. Stringplay, the boy is doing himself up. said the water sprite father appreciatively when the carp Cyprinus had told him the story of the human man with the fishing rod. Didn't you tell me anything, Cyprinus? As surely as I'm swimming here, protested the carp. I was only saying what I saw with my own eyes. And if I've lied a single bit, I want to dry up right now. Yes, if that's the case, then it must be true, said the water sprite father. And then it's actually proper that I make a boy happy as a reward for chasing the guy away with the fishing rod. What do you think so? He beckoned Cyprinus very close and whispered into his mouth, because carp don't have ears, as we all know, what he was going to do with his little water sprite. Said Cyprinus and smirked. Yes, that's really a good idea of yours. You'll certainly make the boy very happy with that. When are you going to tell him? Tonight, the water sprite father explained and also smirked. After supper, before he goes to bed, I'd like to surprise him with this. How good that the little water sprite didn't know anything about it. Otherwise he wouldn't have been able to swallow a bite at dinner for excitement. But he had no idea what his father had planned for him. He dutifully spooned in his soup and ate his plate full of porridge just like every other night. And when he had finished eating, he got up to say goodnight to his parents. Listen, my boy, the water sprite father began. I see you want to go to bed. But actually, I don't like that at all. I thought you could accompany me a little longer. Accompany? Asked the little water sprite in amazement. Yes, repeated the water sprite father, accompany. It's such a beautiful evening tonight. I want to go up an hour or two, and I'll take the harp with me. Really? The little water sprite thought he couldn't hear. Did you really say that I could come with you? That is, said the water sprite father, laying his hand on the boy's shoulder. That is for your adventure this afternoon. Cyprinus told me about it, and I think you really deserve to be allowed to come with me. He picked up his harp and motioned for the little merman to follow him. Little water sprite was very happy about that. It was the first time that his father took him with him when he went upstairs again in the evening. How many times had the boy asked for it? And every time he had been put off until later. When you're older, maybe we can talk about it, his father had only recently answered. You're still too young for something like that for the time being. You belong in bed in the evening. Yes, the water sprite could hardly have given him greater pleasure than by taking him upstairs now. It was already getting dark over the mill pond. The bushes and trees along the bank looked like shadows, and in the sky above the first stars shone. The reeds rustled as the two stepped ashore. The waterman carried his harp under his arm. When a blade of grass passed over the strings, they began to sound gently. Otherwise it was quiet around them. Only the wind came softly and carried the chirping of the crickets from the meadows to them. And sometimes, somewhere in the branches, a bird's voice stirred. It chirped on, from the dream, and then fell silent again. And far in the distance, so far away that it seemed out of the world, the occasional barking of a dog could be heard. The water sprite walked towards the old pasture. He sat down on the grass under the tree. The boy sat down silently and waited. A while after that, the water sprite father raised the harp. He leaned back against the willow. Then he started playing. He played so beautifully that the boy closed his eyes. Then, when he looked up again, he saw the mist women rising up from the damp meadows, white and with waving veils. Had her father lured her up here with his game? They floated silently across the lawn, soon closed and then slipping away again. They danced with the night wind to the strains of the water sprite harp. All silver the little water sprite was enchanted. He didn't take his eyes off the dancing fog women. Like drifting clouds, they ceaselessly took on new forms. Before his eyes they merged and parted again. And sometimes it also happened that one or the other of them disappeared in the middle of the most beautiful floating, without a trace like smoke before the wind. The little water sprite followed the passing activity so fascinated that he didn't even notice how pale, reddish light gradually appeared in the sky behind the hills. He only became aware of him when his father stopped playing the harp and called him softly. Look, the water sprite father called in a half voice, pointing to the shimmering spot at the edge of the sky. Soon it will rise. Who? The little water sprite wanted to ask back just as quietly, but because his father continued to play his harp at that moment, the boy swallowed the question and thought, I'll see what he meant. The shimmering streak at the sky's edge grew lighter and lighter as little water sprite grew fuller anticipation. The reddish glow climbed higher and higher. It flowed ever more powerfully from below. Soon the little water sprite was able to make out every single tree on the hills ahead. Trunks and treetops stood out so clearly in silhouette against the glowing background. And then all at once a radiant, circular disc appeared in the sky, golden yellow and glittering like a marvellously large marigold. The water sprite boy couldn't contain himself any longer. Father, he cried. The sun. The water sprite smiled upon hearing this, and without stopping to play the strings, he replied, "But boy, that's the moon that's rising." "The moon?" "Yes, the moon," laughed the water sprite father. And because it now occurred to him that the little water sprite couldn't do much with the name alone, he began to tell the boy about the moon, how it moves across the sky on clear nights, how it waxes and wanes and sometimes disappears entirely, and how it always comes back and grows again, rounds and fills up, and what he may have already experienced on his travels and will continue to experience until the end of time. And whenever he had talked to the boy for a while, the merman would play his harp again before picking up again to continue speaking. Meanwhile, the moon had risen higher. He came swimming leisurely across the sky. The little water sprite had stretched backwards on the grass to get a better look at him. Almost imperceptibly, the moon had changed colour. He had now turned from a marigold into a sparkling silver thaler, and everything he touched with his rays took on a silvery sheen. He had silvered the sky, the meadows, the pond, the reeds and the dancing fog women, the boat lying on the bank and leaves on the trees. "Now it's drifting straight for the old willow," said the water sprite boy suddenly. "It won't get caught in its branches, will it?" "You can climb up," said the water sprite father, smiling furtively, "and you can help him over it." "Yes," replied the little water sprite boy, "I will." And he climbed swiftly up into the old willow to lift the moon from the branches. But he had been worrying unnecessarily, and no matter how hard he stretched, he could not reach the moon. His father was about to call him down again when he heard the boy ask him in amazement, "Do we have a moon down in the pond?" "Not that I know of," said the water sprite father. "How would a moon get into the pond?" "But I can see it," cried the water sprite boy. "I can see them both. One in the sky, the other in the water below. How nice it is that we have a moon too. If only it doesn't swim away from us. But I already know I'll catch him. If I jump down, then I can catch him. Just think how surprised your mother will be when I suddenly put the moon on the kitchen table for her." Before the father could reply to this speech, but it is possible that he did not have this in mind, the little water sprite threw himself down from the pasture into the pond. He stretched out his hands as he fell so as not to miss the sparkling moon floating in the water. But what was that? As he touched the surface of the water with his fingertips, the moon dissolved into rings of silver waves. "Have you got him?" asked the water sprite father as soon as the spluttering boy surfaced again. But he did not wait for his answer, for he saw how the boy himself was now swimming in the middle of the liquid silver and how silver drops sprayed from his hair as he shook himself. And it pleased the merman so much that he picked up his harp again and kept playing while the little merman was taking his silver bath down in the moonlit pond. It is enough. Summer was slowly coming to an end. The grain had been cut, the harvest wagons swayed towards the village from all sides, the apples and pears were ripening in the orchards. Once again the little water sprite had climbed up onto the old pasture to look out. Then he saw a human coming down the country road. The human man was long and thin. He wore an elegant black suit and walked like a stork. Under his left arm he carried a folded umbrella, and on his nose he had a wire frame or something like that. There were two rings with a bale in between. From each of the two rings a long wire extended outwards, which was bent at the end. With these bent ends, the frame hung from the ears of the human man. The little water sprite had never seen glasses in his life. He didn't even know that such a thing existed. "What kind of frame is that?" he thought. "Shouldn't I just run to the street and take a closer look at the thing?" Hops! The water sprite boy jumped down into the grass and ran to the road. There he waited until the human man came rushing. Then he stepped in his way, pulled off his pointed cap and said, "Hello, man. Tell me, what is that thing on your nose?" The stranger stopped, looked at the little water sprite through the two rings and replied surlily, "You just need to make fun of other people." "What do you mean?" asked the little water sprite. The human male wrinkled his nose. "Well, you hear, if someone has hideous green hair like that, they'd better be very quiet." "How can someone have hair that green?" "Sorry," objected the little water sprite. "I'm not human at all. I'm a water sprite." "What?" cried tall Hendrik. "A water sprite? Don't make me laugh. And you want me to believe nonsense like that? Why is that nonsense?" "It's true," said the little water sprite. "Yes, it is true that you're stupid. Do you want to be in water sprite?" "Oh my goodness, and water sprite. Have you heard anything like this before? There are no watermen." "How?" cried the little water sprite. "Who isn't there? You're not going to claim that I'm not standing here in front of you, are you? Look at me." It annoyed him that the human man had spoken like that. But it got even better. "Leave me with your drivel, you green brat, you." The human man snapped at him. "If you don't leave immediately, Then do something. What are you thinking? Do I really look that stupid? Like I'm still going to believe in water sprite? There are no aquarians. Got it? That's enough. The little water sprite scolded. If you don't want to believe what you see, then you're as stupid as you are. What at? The human man yelled angrily, and he angrily threatened him with his folded umbrella. What am I? Say that again, you cheeky toad. He jumped as if he wanted to take little Warman by the snooze. But he didn't get caught that quickly. Hush, he had already run a few steps away. Catch me if you can, you long silly, he shouted and tweaked the human man's nose. You can't get me. We'll see about it first, snorted the tall man. He swung his umbrella like a sabre and leaped after the little water sprite. So they ran across the meadows towards the mill pond. Wait, I want to show you whether I exist or not, thought the little water sprite. I just need you in the right place first. He ran neither too fast nor too slow. He always walked in a zigzag and in such a way that the human man said every moment, I'll get him with the next step, and then he just grabbed the air again. But when they arrived at the bank of the mill pond, the little waterman turned around in a flash, caught the human man by the feet and pulled him, slip off, into the water. The human man didn't even know what happened to him. He wanted to call for help and desperately waved his umbrella, but the little merman dunked him before he could utter a single cry, and because the human man had gotten him so worked up, he immediately dipped him again and again and again, until tall Henrik had swallowed so much water from the mill pond that his face turned red and blue. Then the little water sprite finally let go of him. The human man crawled onto the bank, completely taken aback. His beautiful black suit clung to his body soaking wet. His hair was covered in mud. He trailed a long drain of pond grass and creepers. Water sloshed out of his shoes with every step. He looked pathetic, his folded umbrella mule and wire. The little waterman was content. He grabbed the umbrella and threw it at the human man. Then he called out, Heda, you long lollipop with your frame on your nose. Now do you think I'm in water sprite? Then the human ran away as fast as his long, skinny legs would carry him. But the little water sprite laughed because he had to hold his stomach. And all the fish, snails and water fleas in the mill pond laughed along. Sponge on to the fried stones. It was a beautiful, sunny autumn day and the first yellow leaves were floating on the mill pond. They floated across the pond like little golden boats. Little water sprite sat at the front door of the water sprite house and counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, counted the little water sprite. And he thought, if it's exactly 99, then I can make a wish. And what I wish for will definitely come true, because 99 is a lucky number. But when he was about 67, in the distance, across the water, he heard a faint tinkling, now light, now dimmer. Along with the ringing, a dull bleating came down to him. It sounded like someone calling into an empty bucket in a deep voice. Oh, let it ring and bleat up there, thought the little water sprite. I have to count. And he tried his best not to listen. But the way it goes, he kept listening and wondering what it could be. And suddenly he wasn't sure anymore whether it was 72 or 73. He had gotten completely confused from listening and thinking. What a pity, thought the little water sprite. Unfortunately, the wish is over now, but maybe it wouldn't have been 99 sheets in the end, and then nothing would have come of it either. But I'd really like to know what's going on up there. He pushed off the bottom with both feet and dove up. When he lifted his head out of the water, he heard the ringing and bleating coming from the meadow behind the pond. So he swam to the bank and bent the reeds apart with his hands. Now he could look out onto the meadow as if through a crack in a curtain. But then he was almost a little disappointed with what he saw, because he had imagined miracles, and now it was just a few cows. They walked leisurely across the meadow and grazed. With every step they took, the bells on their necks rang. Sometimes one of the animals raised its head and mooed. Then they mooed other cows back. And then again, for a while, apart from the tinkle of bells, only their contented purring and panting could be heard. And that's why I swim up specially, thought the little water sprite. Cows. Ordinary cows. He was about to swim home again, but then he noticed something that struck him as quite strange. At the edge of the meadow sat 3 human boys who had made a little fire and from time to time threw in fist-sized yellow pebbles. Then, after a while, they took out the stones with their sticks, scraped off the ashes, and ate the stones. The little water sprite was very surprised about this. He already knew that people had all sorts of strange habits, but that they ate fried stones was new to him. Without further ado, he left the reeds, crossed the meadow and asked the boys by the fire, "Would you let me taste some of it? Because I've never eaten fried stones in my life." "Neither do we," the boys replied. "But I saw myself that you ate some." said the little water sprite stubbornly. "They are probably special stones that you're roasting." Only then did the human boys understand what he meant, and they had to laugh so terribly that the cows looked around at them in amazement. "What?" one boy called. "Fried stones. Those are potatoes," the other two shouted. "Don't you know any potatoes?" "No, how should I know them?" said the little water sprite. "They are called potatoes." "Well, listen, you're making a fool of us. Who are you anyway?" Well, I'm the little water sprite. Can't you see that?" "Yes, like that. You're in water sprite," the boys shouted. "You should have said that. Then of course you can't know what potatoes are. Come on, we'll give you some to taste." One boy scraped a few potatoes out of the hot ashes with his stick. The other scraped off the black crust. The third handed the little water sprite a bag of salt. "You'll have to sprinkle that on yourself," he said kindly. The little water sprite wasn't sure if he should bite. He sniffed around at his potato for a while, but because she smelled so enticing, he thought, "If that doesn't hurt the human cubs, it won't kill me anytime soon. So let's try." He bit into it carefully. "Well, how does it taste?" the boys wanted to know. "More," the little water sprite cried, smacking his lips. Who knew fried stones were so good? Lightning from the box, the little water sprite pleased the three-man boys, and the three-man boys pleased the little water sprite. They parted that evening as good friends. From now on, the boys came to the mill pond almost every day. As soon as the little water sprite heard them whistle, he appeared and greeted them. Sometimes he sat in the branches of the old willow and waved at them from afar when he saw them coming across the meadow. The boys always brought something back for little water sprite. Apples and pears mostly, a quark slice or honey bread, here and there a salted pretzel or a piece of sugar. And once they even gave him a strip of freshly baked crumble cake. All of this tasted great to the little water sprite. He found the human diet to be good, almost as good as the water sprite diet, and he thought he would certainly make the boys very happy if he showed his gratitude and gave them a few exquisite delicacies from Mother's aquarium kitchen in return. Unfortunately, the three of them had no appetite for fried toad eggs with salted water fleas. They even despised the steamed frog spawn that Mother had collected and preserved in the spring. Little water sprite fared no better with the salads and seaweed dishes. He might offer his friends whatever he wanted. They would not be persuaded to even try a single spoonful of it. Then the little waterman finally gave up. He never brought the young men anything to eat anymore. Instead, he presented them with the finest mussel shells and snail shells he could find. Sometimes they also got a few glittering stones from him, which were otherwise very rarely found. The boys were very pleased with such gifts, and the little water sprite was also happy because he now had something to give to his friends. When they were together, the four of them never had enough time. Then they bounced flat pebbles across the water and counted who got them up the most times. Or they played hide and seek in the shore bushes. Or they would carve flutes out of reeds and compete in blowing until one of them ran out of breath. The boys showed little water sprite how to stand upside down and do cartwheels and somersaults backwards, and little water sprite did the same. For a change, the three were allowed to watch him as he drove down the wooden gully. He said there was nothing wrong and that they should try it out, but they said it wasn't possible because unfortunately they were only human, and people would certainly not come across the mill wheel with whole bones. Only water sprite boys could do that, not them. Besides, they would have fun doing it, even if they could only watch. No, it never got boring when the water sprite boy was with his three friends. But what he liked best was still sitting by the fire with the boys, roasting potatoes and filling his stomach with roasted stones. Once he received the three with the words, "How about it? Would you like a potato fire? Dry reeds are taken care of. I've already collected a whole heap. All you had to do was take the flash out of the box and hold it under it, then it burns. What do you say?" the boys asked. "The flash from the box." "Well, yes, the lightning," cried the water sprite boy. "I know, you have a small box with lots of thin sticks, and if you take out a stick and snip, makes, then it flashes, and the little stick starts to burn from the flash out of the box." "Oh, you probably mean the matches," said the boys, and one of them immediately reached into his trouser pocket. "Yes," confirmed the little water sprite, glancing at the box the boy was showing him. "Sometimes young guys really are a bit slow on the uptake." The boy was about to strike a match when one of the other two said, "Wait, how about you let our little water sprite do that? Wouldn't you like to conjure up a lightning bolt out of the box yourself?" he asked the water sprite boy. "Oh yes," the other boys cried. "The little waterman should do it, you're right." The little water sprite asked for the box. Then he took the match and hesitantly applied it. Surely you don't burn your fingers. He asked to be on the safe side. No, no, the cubs reassured him. If you get too hot, just blow it out. Nothing can happen. So the little water sprite struck the match. But because he probably didn't quite trust the thing and had been a bit too hasty, he ran out of it again. Take another one, said the boys, and give yourself a little more time. He obeyed. This time he succeeded. The water sprite boy proudly held the burning stick under the reeds. Then the flames roared up and he was happy. Good for a beginner. His friends praised him, and the one who owned the box added, if you want, little water sprite, you can keep the box. I'll give it to you. And the sticks too. Yes, of course, the sticks too, the boy assured him. How else were you going to get a lightning bolt out of the box? There wasn't much missing, and the little water sprite would have hugged the boy's neck with happiness. Cheering, he threw the matchbox up in the air, caught it, threw it up again. In between, he clapped his hands enthusiastically. Then, suddenly, he put the box in his jacket pocket, turned, and ran toward the pond. Hey, what's the matter with you? The boys shouted, puzzled. But the little water sprite didn't hear her anymore. He had already jumped headlong into the water with his box. Mumbo-jumbo while the human boys were sitting on the shore, throwing potatoes on the fire and racking their brains in vain over what on earth had suddenly gotten into their little water sprite. The water sprite boy swam around deep down in the mill pond and looked for the carp Cyprinus. Cyprinus had always been rather grumpy lately. He resented the little water sprite for spending so much time with the human cubs. Get away from me with the people. Cyprinus had snapped at him again recently. Either they come to bathe and whirl up the mud and we can hardly find our way home anymore, or they hang those darn things, the fishing rods, in our heads water and waiting for a bite and for them to eat us, with butter and onion rings. I've heard no, get away from me with the people, and water sprite mustn't get involved with them under any circumstances. I don't understand how you can forget yourself so far. No, I don't get it. Good Cyprinus will be amazed when I show him what the young men gave me, thought the little water sprite. And he imagined the carp had mirroring the flashes from its box. There he could see that it wasn't so stupid for a water sprite to have 3 people as friends. After a long search he found the old man. He greeted and pulled out his box. Guess what I got in here, he said. Bubbled Cyprinus. How can I know what you have in that box? Worms maybe. Or breadcrumbs. Lightning, said the little water sprite. Lightning? In such a tiny box? Cyprinus looked at the little water sprite, shaking his head. Are you making fun of me? Not at all, said the little water sprite. There really are lightning bolts in this box. I'll prove to you right away that I've spoken the truth. Cyprinus watched suspiciously as the water sprite boy took out a match. He didn't quite understand the story. He withdrew a little, just in case. Now I say hocus pocus, the water sprite boy explained with a straight face. And then you'll see what happens next. So watch out. Hocus pocus. He struck the match at pocus. To his annoyance, it didn't work this time. There was no flash, much less a flame. Well, if that's all, said Cyprinus, swimming closer again, then I must tell you that you have disappointed me quite a bit. I always get it wrong the first time, said the little water sprite calmly, but not the second time, you can count on it. He had promised himself and the carp Cyprinus too much. The matches didn't burn, nor did the second, third, or fourth. If you called it lightning, said Cyprinus contemptuously, I'm a tree frog. Hee, what nonsense. You'll have to find someone stupider than me. And he blew out the air mockingly. I can't explain it at all. How come I can't do it anymore? The little water sprite pondered dejectedly, and he told the carp how well he had done it earlier, out on land, at the human boy. Yes, you got the box from the humans, said Cyprinus. Then I'm no longer surprised. They swindled you with it, that's all. I've persuaded you 100 and 1,000 times to beware of them take it, but you don't want to hear it. You'd rather make yourself look ridiculous. If I were you now, I know what I would do. What would you do? Asked the water sprite boy. I would swim up, said Cyprinus, and throw that box at their feet. Yes, sir. And then I would say, slide down my hump. I'm not going to say that, said the little water sprite, but I'm going to talk to them very calmly. I can't believe they were trying to smack me. Hootin' you? Said the human boys when the little water sprite had told them all about his misfortune. No, no one wanted to smear you, you can believe that. But you can't ask for matches to be put in the water, burn. You know, the water spoils them, there's nothing you can do about it. So I can throw the rest away then? Asked the water sprite boy. Yes, throw them on the fire. We'll bring you new ones tomorrow. I knew that Cyprinus only wanted to put you down, said the little water sprite. But he doesn't know you. And he scattered the matches one by one into the fire. When he then wanted to throw in the box, the older boy stopped him. No, you'll have to save those, he said. You know, an idea occurred to me. We'll fill the empty box with earthworms. On our behalf, you carry them down to the carp Cyprinus and give it to him. It's possible that he won't think as badly of us as he did before. Good night, little water sprite. The days passed, the year got older and older. The trees were already bare of leaves. It often rained, and the friends came to the mill pond less and less often. And if they did dare, they carried it for a long time stockings and raincoats. Little water sprite often waited for her in vain. One morning the sun shone again after a long time. The little water sprite noticed that when he looked out the window, the water was brighter and clearer than it had been in days. Then the boy thought, today they will definitely come. And he was looking forward to seeing them again. He couldn't know what had happened to the mill pond overnight. Unknowingly, he dressed, ate his breakfast, and set out to swim to shore. He would sit there, as was his habit, in the branches of the old willow and look out. When he saw his friends coming, he wanted to wave. He wasn't thinking anything in particular as he emerged, but then he bumped his nose into something very hard and cold. He couldn't stick his head out of the water. That's strange, he said to himself. I toast something I can feel but don't see. What could it be? If I'm somewhere else get through, I have to show up in any case. That would be even nicer. But no matter how many times the water sprite boy tried, it didn't work. The whole pond was as if covered with glass. The little water sprite had to realise that he couldn't do anything. He swam home thoughtfully. Well, said the water sprite father when the boy told him about his discovery. Then we're ready again. Winter is coming. The pond is frozen over. Now it's time to go to bed and put the blanket over the pool ears and sleep. But we just got up, said the water sprite boy. That doesn't change anything, said the father. The time has come when a water sprite has to comply. In winter you don't miss anything anyway. And when spring comes, the sun will wake us up in time. Are you sure about that? Asked the little water sprite. Yes, replied the father. I know that. I know that as surely as you are my boy. Come and lie down. Mother has already made the beds. The little water sprite followed and went into the bedroom. Because he was suddenly very tired, his mother helped him undress. When he was lying happily in bed, his father shook his hand again and gave him a friendly nod. See you in spring, said the water sprite father. Yes, until spring, the little water sprite repeated after him. Until spring. Here. He thought of his friends. He thought of everything he had experienced up until now. How he had swum across the pond with his father for the first time. How they had played hide and seek in the thicket with creepers. How afterwards he was allowed to ride back on the back of the carp Cyprinus. The ride in the wooden box, the slide over the mill wheel, and the silver moonlit night on the bank. It had all been very nice. So nice that one could easily dream of it for the whole winter. Good night, little water sprite, he heard someone say. The voice seemed to come from far away. Who was that spoke? It was a good voice. He knew it. Good night, little water sprite, said the voice again. Then the little water sprite knew that it had been the mother's voice. And he was glad that he had heard the mother again before he fell asleep completely into the dream bright water sprite winter.